Did it grow in the brewer jar?
Yes.
Yes. Where did it grow in the thio? Everywhere, throughout. So what are we going to call E. coli? Facultative. Yay. Micrococcus. Did it grow in the candle jar?
Yes.
Did it grow in the brewer jar?
No.
Where did it grow in the thio? Yeah, it dropped down. It was kind of in this funny layer. Not at the top, really, not at the bottom. So what are we going to call it? Microaerophil, which is handy because its name is Micrococcus, is the microaerophil. Let's try Clostridium. Did it grow in the candle jar?
No.
Did it grow in the brewer jar?
Yes.
Yes, it's quite transparent, but hopefully you can see that. Where did it grow in the thio?
Below the oxygen.
Yeah, it grew like everywhere except for the top. Remember that the oxygen is only at the very top because the thioglycolate reduces the oxygen throughout the tube. So hopefully you saw at the very top there was a little layer with no growth. Yes?
Would you say it grew at the very bottom as well?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, it?
Yeah. So what are we going to call Clostridium? An anaerobe. Okay. So finally the last one was Bacillus megaterium, which I wasn't too happy with how it grew, but hopefully you figured out by a process of elimination. Did it grow in the candle jar?
Yes.
Sure. Did it grow in the brewer jar?
No.
No. So it needs oxygen, but where did it grow? In the thio, right at the top. Grew at the top. So what are we going to call it? An aerobe. Yay. So guys, for the lecture exam, either in the form of an essay or in the multiple choice, you need to know about those enzymes that cells use to detoxify oxygen. So what enzymes am I talking about here? SOD and catalase. So which one of these organisms doesn't have either enzyme? Clostridium. So you should know that anaerobes can't handle any oxygen because they don't have any SOD and catalase. The other categories, the other ones at least that you need to know, they have SOD and catalase. The microaerophils have like a little bit, they have like a reduce. So micro means small, so just keep that in mind. Small amount of oxygen, small amount of SOD and catalase. Okay? So hopefully when you look at the discussion questions, they won't seem completely baffling to you. So let's pull those up here really quick. So, and I realize this is, you're busy right now, you're worried about your lecture exam, but you should probably just keep up on this. I don't know about you, but you don't want to spend your whole spring break working on your notebook, getting caught up. And you certainly don't want to wait 2 weeks to answer discussion questions, because you won't remember what we did today when you come back from spring break. So let's take a peek-see at oxygen requirements. Where is that? Here we go. Well, wow, I just answered the first one for you. For organisms, describe which cellular enzymes they possess. So, E. coli, Micrococcus, Bacillus have both enzymes. They have SOD and catalase. Clostridium, the anaerobe, doesn't have either one. So you don't even have to go to Tortora chapter 6 or your lecture notes. Next one, where in vivo? Remember, in vivo means in life, in a living organism, as opposed to in vitro, which means in glass or artificially in a petri dish. So where might you expect to find anaerobes, aerobes, microaerophils, and facultatives? Okay, so we'll start with the one that students have the hardest time with, and that is anaerobes. Where in your body might you have organisms like Clostridium that don't like oxygen? Are there places in your body without oxygen? There are, yes, there are. Okay, so who here has heard of Clostridium difficile, or C. diff? Okay, it is a problem in the hospital setting, causes ulcerative colitis. So obviously we don't use C. diff as a control organism in this class, okay? But it is related to Clostridium, and it is an anaerobe. So where does Clostridium live? Yeah, specifically the colon. Okay, so the colon is the large intestine. The colon is the large intestine. And guys, in the colon, there are gases, but not oxygen. There are other gases there, but not oxygen. So in the lumen, remember, you guys remember this from anatomy? The lumen is like the inside of the tube. It's called the lumen of the large intestine. Very little, if any, oxygen. So you can find anaerobes in the colon. And somewhat ironically, you can also find them in your mouth. And most people have anaerobes in their mouth. And where those anaerobes will grow is they'll grow in the, like if you have tartar buildup, and everyone eventually has some tartar buildup in between going to the dentist, hopefully I go like every 6 months, and they scrape and they get rid of all that stuff. You can actually have anaerobes that grow in the layers. That's a biofilm. You guys remember biofilm? So just FYI, anaerobes can be found ironically in your mouth and the teeth and tartar buildup and the large intestine. And anaerobes are found where there's been major tissue damage that's blocked blood flow. So how many of you have heard of gangrene before? Gangrene, yeah, is usually where there's been such damage to tissue, the blood is not flowing into that area. And where there's blood, there are red blood cells with oxygen. So if you have, a bowel obstruction, or if you have diabetes that has gone to the point where you don't get blood flow to your toes, for example, you can get gangrene in there, and that you get an infection. So wherever there's tissue damage, where there's no blood flow, you can get anaerobes in there. So usually gangrene is caused by another Clostridium. It's Clostridium perfringens. So anyway, more on that later. But okay, so there's a couple of places. What about aerobes? Where are you going to find those? Yeah, this is just common sense. I'm not asking you to be an expert. I'm just saying, where might you expect? On your skin, you got a lot of oxygen there. So sometimes students want to say the lungs, but there's a name for when you have bacteria growing in your lungs. It's called, usually you get fluid buildup and it's called pneumonia. You should not have bacteria crawling around your lungs. You have macrophages in there to get rid of that. But on your skin is a better answer than in the lungs. Ooh, microaerophils. They like decreased oxygen, increased CO2. Where might you find that in your body? Pretty much any tissue has those conditions. Think about, those of you who've had phys should know this. Some of you that have anatomy and thought about it a little bit. Okay, so in the room that we're breathing, there's what, 18% oxygen? I'm just making this up. Okay, there's a lot of oxygen, 18% plus or minus. So it goes into your lungs. What happens in your lungs? Red blood cells have hemoglobin. They exchange CO2 for oxygen. They take that oxygen into the tissues of your body, and they dump off the oxygen, and they pick up CO2. So out in your tissues throughout your body have decreased oxygen compared to room air. That means they don't have 18%, they have maybe 1% or 5% or something. And depending on where and what's going on, they have increased CO2. Okay, so those conditions can be found throughout the body where there's good blood flow. Good blood flow, you're gonna have those conditions. Microaerophils, a lot of pathogens are microaerophils, a lot of them. Okay. And then, facultatives. Anywhere. They can go with or without oxygen. Okay. Two important pathogens that are anaerobic. Two that are microaerophilic. Anaerobes. Let's see, from lecture. You know Clostridium, right? Clostridium. The one that we use in class, not a pathogen. Not a pathogen. We use safe kind of organisms. This is just The one we use in class, sporogenes, is a soil microbes not associated with infections. But I just mentioned Clostridium difficile. So difficile, think like difficult to treat. Clostridium difficile causes ulcerative colitis. There's an example of an anaerobe. Another one within the genus Clostridium that I just mentioned causes gangrene. There's other causes, but this is the more, it's called perfringens, causes gangrene. So Clostridium, there's a whole bunch of them. Who's heard of botulism? Who's heard of tetanus? They're caused by Clostridium species. But I just gave you these two because you maybe didn't know it before you took the class. So difficile causes ulcerative colitis. Perfringens causes gangrene in tissues that are damaged. So, sadly, sometimes like homeless people, and they're living in Chicago or somewhere under a bridge, and they have their boots on the entire winter, and the blood flow stops, and they get frozen, they'll get gangrene. Or people that have untreated diabetes over really long periods of time start to lose the small blood vessels like in their feet, and they'll have to have toes or feet removed due to diabetes. That's caused by usually Clostridium perfringens. So, microaerophils, see lecture notes and Tortora. So anybody remember what was I do, but does anyone remember what was the example microaerophil from lecture? Do you remember that? Remember for each of them, I gave you
Campylobacter?
Campylobacter, thank you. So there's one. Campylobacter. So Campylobacter, you can just give me the genus name. Campylobacter causes a diarrheal syndrome similar to Salmonella. Most students have heard of Salmonella, and then when if you're cooking chicken at home or something, that juice is crawling with Salmonella. It's also crawling with Campylobacter. And Campylobacter is a microaerophil. Won't grow in regular room air, needs decreased. Another one is